Welcome to Vape News Radio, the voice of vaping. In each show, we share the latest about regulations and things you need to know, plus upcoming conferences and fests, along with interviews with the movers and shakers in this fabulous vape space. Are you looking to get into this ever-expanding marketplace? Do you want to master this industry? Listen up as Norm Bauer, the vape mentor, shares it all. And here's your host, Norm Bauer.
Hello and welcome to Vape Radio, the voice of vape, and this is show number 89. I'm Norm Bauer with Vape Mentors, and on Vape Radio we talk to some of the major thought leaders in the vaping industry and empower you to be smarter and better in your vaping business. Our supporters include Vibe, the Vape Industry Business Exchange. If you're a vape shop and want to tap into the collective buying power of hundreds of shops, visit vibe4vape.com. That's Vibe, the number 4, vape.com. And if you are a liquid manufacturer of any size, they have options for you to stay compliant affordably and to expand your business model. Vibe will officially launch soon, and we'll include links to that event in our show notes. We're also sponsored by the Keller & Heckman E-Vapor Legal Symposium. We brought together over 10 attorneys, including one from China, Brussels, and England, plus 8 industry leaders, and over 2 days filmed 12 hours of great insight to offer you. The package is available for purchase. Contact me at norm@vapementors.com for information on how to get your own copy. Meanwhile, if you'd like information on what is going on with the FDA, we are offering a free, yes, that's right, free FDA mini course. You can access it at vapementors.com/FDA mini. That's FDAMINI. Before we begin, I wanted to thank all of you loyal fans as we just celebrated our 3-year anniversary. We're getting close to 100 episodes and have had over 1.3 million downloads in that time. The free and easy days of the vape industry are behind us, and aside from the challenges of competition and negative press, we have 2 major foes when it comes to regulations. One is the Fed, the FDA, who lowered the hammer last August with the deeming regulations. On top of that, we have 50 more enemies in our midst. They are the individual states and the challenges of dealing with some of their actions. Starting early out of the gate was Minnesota, who instituted an insane tax on nicotine. That was followed by others, and one that we spoke about in detail in show number 87, the state of Indiana. They pretty much eliminated all out-of-state suppliers into the state, but recently that law was overturned and ruled unconstitutional by the federal appellate court. Last year, the state of Pennsylvania approved a 40% floor tax, which is what we'll be speaking about today. Chuck Huff, the president of the Pennsylvania Vape Association, tells us the effects on the vape industry in my old home state and how it has decimated the vape industry there. Entrepreneurs that risk their hearts, their souls, and their money have been ruined in some cases, and it ain't over yet. The worst may still be yet to come. And in my current state of California, the deal breaker that just passed last year, known as Proposition 56, is even worse. On top of the legal age of vaping raised to 21, we haven't quite seen the effect, but the tidal wave is closer and growing. We'll explore that one in future shows. But for now, sit back and listen to the tale of Pennsylvania. It's not Halloween, but this story may scare you worse than any manufactured horror. Okay, everybody, welcome back to Vape Radio. This is Norm Bauer, the voice of vape, and today we are going into a deep, dark hole. It's not a hole that we want to visit, but it's a hole that is there nonetheless. It's all about government regulations, and of course, this conversation has been beaten to death over the last several years. The deeming regulations, of course, on a federal level went into effect last August, but they kind of triggered their hand even 2 years earlier than that. And what's been really kind of becoming more impactful is not so much the Fed, although we certainly need to be aware of them, but the effect of the state regulations. And the states for a long time really didn't pay much attention to the vaping industry, but then they started to, and now they're doing it with a force. So today what we're going to talk about is the effect of state regulations on the vaping industry. So, with that the case, out of all the 50 states in the U.S., there is one state that really is on the stage right now, and that is the state of Pennsylvania, which happens to be my home state where I was born. We have on the phone Chuck Huff, who is the president of the Pennsylvania Vaping Association. So Chuck, welcome to Vape Radio.
Well, thank you very much, Norm. It's a pleasure to be here. You are one of my most revered mentors in this industry. I just want you to know that.
Oh, you're very kind. Maybe I should just stop the interview right now because I think I've got enough here for everybody. But no, thank you so much for that. Look, it's been an honor and a pleasure to know you over the last several years as we've known each other. But let's go ahead and put that to the side and let's talk about what's going on in the state of Pennsylvania. So before we do that, tell us a little bit about what your involvement is with the vaping industry, how you got into it, were you a former smoker, and exactly what you're doing in the B2B space right now.
I started smoking at the age of 13. At one point during my smoking, I was up to about a pack and a half, 2 packs a day. And then as I got older, I started, looking around, seeing what I could do to cut down on that. I tried the drugs and didn't work well. And then I just finally gave up and said, if I'm going to smoke, I got to smoke. About 4 years ago, one of my coworkers who was vaping, he says, man, you got to try this. So I went out and I got myself an Ego C-Twist starter pen, stopped off at the local tobacco shop and bought some juice. And, I haven't gone back. I was hooked. So after I saw what vaping was doing for me, I decided, you know what, I would really like to share this with other people. And I'd like to, give other people an opportunity. So I did start an online vape store, and that kind of went along fairly well. And I was really pleased that I was able to offer the consumers, an alternative to smoking. So that's kind of what, and then the hammer came down on us in Pennsylvania a year ago.
Let's kind of back up for a second before we get into that. So we just wanted to kind of clarify for the record of how long you've been in the industry and what your position is right now. So tell us about the Pennsylvania Vaping Association, because I'm not sure how many state associations there are right now, but probably in the minority. And so maybe tell us a little bit about how this was formed and what is the intention behind the Pennsylvania Vaping Association.
Sure. Well, Pennsylvania Vaping Association was started because we were interested in, and we listened to a lot of vaping programs across the nation. And one of the things that we heard loud and clear was that there was a need for education, educating smokers, educating legislators. And so that's kind of how we started. That was our main platform when we started the Pennsylvania Vaping Association. And then as we developed and as time went on, we saw that there was a need to really get into legislative activities and hiring a lobbyist. And so that's what we've done. We have hired a lobbyist. We are, working on repealing the 40% tax that's currently in the environment here in Pennsylvania and replacing that with a 5 cent per milliliter. We haven't forgotten about the educational part of that. I really hold that close to my heart because I think that with education, we can overcome much of the misinformation that's been publicized about vaping in the United States.
Okay, so what was it you think that prompted the Pennsylvania government to, one, look into the regulation of the vaping industry, and to the best of your knowledge, do you see any justification or any rationale as to why they went as heavy-handed as they did? And before you answer the second part, maybe you can talk a little bit about the 40% tax and what a floor tax is and so forth and so on, because this is not a very common thing. Usually in the world of taxation, ladies and gentlemen, an entity, whether it be a city, state, county, federal, it really doesn't matter. They will put a tax on a certain percentage of normally the finished product, retail, wholesale, whatever the case might be. But this particular tax in the state of Pennsylvania is a dangerous precedent, and unfortunately other states are starting to look at it the same way. So let's talk about exactly what the state of Pennsylvania is taxing in the vaping industry.
Sure. Well, the 40% electronic cigarette tax was actually introduced in the 2014-2015 state budget, and then it was removed it didn't actually end up in the final budget. It was reintroduced in the 2015-2016 state budget, which became a law at the end of June, at the end of our fiscal year. What that does is it's a two-part tax. It's a 40% floor tax was implemented against the wholesale value of any inventory that you currently had in your store or in stock.
So let's drill that down for a second. I'm going to pause for a moment. So let's just say that you are, in this case, Chuck the Vape Shop. You've got inventory to the tune of $20,000. We'll call it that. So what you're saying is the state of Pennsylvania is asking you to pay a 40% tax on the value of those products. Are they taxing the wholesale value, what you actually paid for, or what they estimate to be the retail value, Chuck?
They're taxing the wholesale value.
Okay, so you paid $20,000 in costs, and now the government wants you to pay $20,000 in advance before you ever sell anything. Is that correct?
Well, it would be 40% of 20,000.
Right. That's a lot of money. That's $8,000.
Yes.
And this
Yes.
and this would have to be paid up before you ever sell anything, and that doesn't take into account any products that might be outdated or won't be sold or might be discounted or anything else like that. Correct?
That's correct. And it doesn't matter how old that product is. It may have been, let's just say I had my store for 5 years. In the first year that I opened my store, I ordered $50,000 worth of devices, and in this industry, things progress very rapidly. We get new mods, we get new tanks. So whatever I bought 5 years ago, no longer relevant anymore. I can't hardly give the stuff away, but I still have that in my inventory. So I'm still required to do a complete inventory from top to bottom, and the final dollar value of that inventory, I write a check out to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for 40% of that value.
So questions for you. Is there any type of audit process? In other words, if you say that you have $20,000 worth of wholesale materials and you might actually have $25,000 worth of wholesale materials, and of course we know that you wouldn't do that, do they actually come in and audit or double check the numbers for accuracy?
Yes, they have done that here in Pennsylvania. The Department of Revenue has done spot auditing. I believe the stores that were audited were stores who had high dollar retail dollar amounts that were reported, because we still have to pay a 6% excise tax in addition, or before the 40% tax came into effect, we had a 6% sales tax. So they have the dollars of all the vape stores in Pennsylvania. So they knew who to target. They knew who to look at. So, and they did do spot checks of a good number of those stores.
Wow. So the floor tax concept, I never heard of before this all came down in the state of Pennsylvania. Is this a tax that government regulators have used on a regular basis, or is this one of those things that they have the ability to use but really hasn't put into effect in a lot of places?
I have never heard of it, 40% or any percentage of a floor tax being assessed against any industry in the United States. And I did do some research into that, and I couldn't find, other than in the vaping industry, I believe there are some other states who had implemented a floor tax. I don't recall right off the top of my head whether or not it was more or less than the 40% that Pennsylvania did. And I think that as far as Pennsylvania is concerned, I think that they just simply looked at what other states were doing. They had a deficit in the budget that they needed to fill. They looked at the vaping industry. Of course, they've been looking at us for the past 3 years. They've been seeing, of course, the national figures and the estimates that have come out of, the Wells Fargo business analyst who predicted that vaping would reach $10 million by 2018, whatever her number was. So they looked at that and saw, I think we have a cash cow here.
But, all things being equal, there's certainly other industries that are larger than the vaping industry, not just in Pennsylvania, but in any state. I mean, they could just as easily go after the automobile industry and say, we're going to institute not a 40% floor tax, but a 5% floor tax on every car that's there on your lot, whether you sell it or sold it there or not. So there's a lot of other industries that they could look at, but, that's immaterial. So this law went into effect on what date, Chuck?
The law went into effect when the state budget was passed and became law on June 31st of 2016. They gave us a grace period wherein the floor tax itself wasn't actually due to be paid until the end of December. Then the second part of that tax, which was the 40% wholesale tax, that became effective on October the 1st of 2016. So any product was purchased for resale you are now required to pay 40% of that wholesale cost to the Department of Revenue here in Pennsylvania. And that holds true for consumers as well. So consumers who are buying products online were required to, number one, they were only supposed to purchase from licensed retailers, and the licensed retailer was then supposed to collect the 40% tax as a separate line item on their invoice. Now, we all know that that's not really happening because a lot of retailers said, oh, that's the responsibility of the consumer. Because under Pennsylvania law, a consumer who buys online from an unlicensed wholesaler is an unclassified importer.
Wow. Unclassified importer. Not exactly a tag you want to have on your sign there.
No. And that unclassified importer is then required by law to pay the 40% tax themselves.
All right, so let me jump in here. When the number of retail stores was at its, we'll call it peak in the state of Pennsylvania, and maybe it wasn't even prior to this law going into effect. Maybe the peak of vape shops in the state was 10% higher, but what would you say would be the average number, if you had to guess, about how many shops were active before all this came down, and about how many shops do you think have closed since that time? Can you offer some type of ratio so we can see the immediate impact? Because if I'm a retail shop, and I've got $100,000 worth of inventory, which is not an unusual or exaggerated number at all, and suddenly I have to send the check to the state of Pennsylvania for $40,000, that is digging into my budget big time. So what kind of, you think, effect it's had in the reality of the real world out there?
Well, the numbers that we were able to come up, I have a great staff. We looked at people that were active in advocacy in Pennsylvania that were vape store owners. So we assembled a great staff. We did a lot of research. We did a lot of digging. We came up with that there was approximately 450 active and operating vape shops / businesses, because we do have some distributors. We do have some juice manufacturers here within the Commonwealth. After the tax was implemented, let's just say from January of 2016 until right now, and of course, some of those closures were prior to the vaping tax being implemented, we've had over 100 stores close. Wow. Now, about 60 of those, or 70, I'm not real sure. It's kind of hard to pin it down to what was directly related to the 40%. Because as you know, part of that is the deeming regulations that scared a lot of people away from the industry. But the 40% tax has had the most dire effect on the vaping industry here in Pennsylvania, with the highest percentage of stores closing, and they're still closing. We've had, I believe, 2 stores announce this week that they're closing. Some of these vape shops were shops that had multiple shops, and maybe a small one, 10 miles down the road's not doing so well, and I understand it. I get it. It's just business. You really have to close. If it's not a profitable enterprise, you really should close it. So that's kind of the environment that we're seeing right now.
Those are horrible numbers, Chuck, by anyone's guidelines, because basically you're losing 25% of all the retail shops out there. If I'm Joe Consumer, Joe Vapor, and suddenly there's no shops around me, do you have any type of evidence or anecdotal information? Do you think that people are saying, oh, you know what, this vaping thing is getting to be too much of a hassle, screw it, I'm just going to go back to my tobacco sticks? Or do you think that they're going online? Or what do you think the average consumer out there is doing in the state of Pennsylvania to take care of their supply?
Well, I think that there is a good percentage that are going online. I know that many of the shops that I've personally visited and spoken with the owners and the management staff in those shops, they've seen anywhere from a 40 to 50% decrease in sales. I think that a lot of that is attributed to folks going online and buying online because they think they're going to get away with it by not paying the tax. We've already had a couple of folks say, hey, I just got a letter from Department of Revenue saying I owe them this tax. So I don't know. I don't have any data that says they're going back to smoking. if there was only one shop in a small town, the closest vape store is 30, 40 miles away, then that's probably going to be an accurate assessment. I personally have seen people who were vaping that have just quit, not related to the tax, but they just quit and went back to smoking because, let's face it, vaping requires a little more effort than just taking a cigarette out of a pack and flicking your lighter and lighting it, right?
Indeed, it does.
We're going to lose some people to the fact that, man, I'm out of juice, my battery's dead, I need a new coil. It's just too much hassle.
Well, so let me ask you a question. In the state of Indiana, of course, they put on some very heavy-handed regulations that were fought against by the Smoke-Free Organization plus several others, and they actually did go to court. They went to federal court, 7th Circuit of Appeals, I believe, and they actually got the rule overturned as being unconstitutional. Now, in the state of Pennsylvania, of course, what they've done is not considered unconstitutional. It's just anti-business. So do you think, as now that the dust is starting to settle, do you have any insight as far as, are these regulators wondering what they did? Because now, instead of generating more tax revenue, they're actually hurting their tax revenue because you have less stores selling less products, and which means that it's having just the opposite effect. I mean, do you have any evidence from maybe politicians or regulators who have kind of shared with you and said, Chuck, you know what? I think we've fucked up here. I think that we did the wrong thing. I mean, have you heard anything along those lines?
Yes, I have. We have a very strong supporter in the Senate, Senator Scott Wagner, who's actually running for governor of Pennsylvania, spoke at my rally that I had at the Capitol in January. And he's a small business owner. I mean, he's a business owner. Now, I wouldn't say small, because that's one of the things that we have expressed to our legislators is, if you continue down this road, let's expand it out just a little bit beyond the fact that it is a small business and it is vaping. That vape store is paying rent. They're leasing space. They are drawing consumers into other retail establishments that are in that strip mall or in that region. So it's drawing consumers into an area where that consumer may not have gone before because they didn't really have a reason to go there. And then we'll look at the employees. We have probably 2,500 to 3,000 employees that worked at those 100 shops that are now out of a job. They're going to draw unemployment. They're going to go on welfare. So that puts an additional burden on the Commonwealth, to support those whose jobs they just eliminated. So yes, the legislators that we've spoken with, they understand it.
I have to say that as an entrepreneur for 4 decades now, and prior to getting into vaping, I was with a company that provided business startup and business acceleration workshops, and we supported small business. We worked with the SBA, we worked with SCORE. So I've worked with almost 1,000 businesses, non-vape related, over a 4-year period in very, very challenging times post-recession. So let me ask you a question, Chuck, as we bring this to maybe a happy close or maybe not a happy close. Is there any writing on the wall? Is there any sense of optimism, or maybe things will turn around? Because here we have a brand new president. We have some new looks at the Cole-Bishop Amendment in regards to our grandfather date. And so there's some things that are keeping people hopeful about the FDA's guidelines, but we don't really know exactly where that's going to go down. So is there anything that maybe is positive around the corner in the state of Pennsylvania, or are basically you guys heading into a dead end?
There is some positive movement. We have a drive right now to try to collect data from vaping stores in Pennsylvania regarding the number of milliliters of juice that they have sold, so that we can go back to our Department of Revenue and say, okay, here's statistical data that we have gathered. It's real data. It's not anecdotal, that shows that the 5 cents per milliliter will actually generate revenue. So we're very optimistic that we can gather that data. We need more participation. Naturally, we have some business owners who are hesitant to release that data, but it is completely anonymous. We have a survey out. So hopefully, we can show them, and they know that, they understand that they didn't collect near as much as they wanted to, or they thought they were going to. So our lobbyist is very hopeful that if we can get enough data, and we're looking at a couple of other surrounding states that have the 5 cents per milliliter, we're analyzing the data that they have to try to bolster what we have and just prove, yeah, this is going to continue to provide revenue. It's going to allow shops to continue in operation. It's going to allow new shops to open up because they don't have that huge overhead looming over them. And, that would prevent somebody from opening a new business.
Well, it might just take one fiscal year, maybe even longer, before they see the net effect as being negative rather than positive. Well, let's go ahead and bring this to a close, Chuck. And if someone has any questions for you or comments to you or anything that they'd like to follow up with to you, what is the best way of contacting you? And I'll put that information in our show notes as well.
They can email me at chuff, HUFF, at pavape.org. Or they could actually visit the website. There is a contact us on the website, which is simply pavape.org. We do post information on the website. We have a Facebook community as well. But the best way is through email.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I wish that we could have a more upbeat, more lighthearted, more positive type of interview here. But the reality of it is, ladies and gentlemen, is that the vaping industry is in the most precarious place it's probably ever been. When I started in the summer of 2013, anyone and everyone could and did open up a vape shop or an online store or start their own liquid company. And next thing you know, we had people creating million-dollar operations when they were in the right place at the right time. Now the tide has turned. Now it's a brand new book, and now we have challenging times. Now understand this. This is not the only industry that has ever gone through challenging times, and it's not the last one that's ever going to do it. Me personally, I spent decades in real estate and saw the ups and downs of the economy. I spent time in mortgages, and of course we know what happened back in the recession of 2008. We had a major meltdown on a national level, which had international and long-term implications. What we're going through here in vaping is a microcosm of that. We are seeing it by individual states. We are seeing it sometimes by individual counties or even cities, and certainly on the federal level. So, Chuck, if it's okay, we would love to be able to have you back again. And obviously, as things get better, or if things get better, we would love to have an update from you. And then if things unfortunately don't turn better, we would love to know the results of that, because we just need to get pissed off about it. We just need to get up in arms around it and get involved. And so we're hoping that you might be a catalyst for that. Would that be okay, sir?
That would be excellent. I would really appreciate that. And one last comment that I wanted to make is one of the things that I've heard from my good friend Dimitri, not my good friend, but an acquaintance, of course, was that it's time for us to confront our legislators and really say, if you're opposing vaping, then you're all for killing people by forcing them to go to cigarettes.
Correct. We're going to go ahead and leave it on that note. So you've been listening to Vape Radio. This is Norm Bauer, the voice of vape, and do not go away, because we are going to be back with our next show shortly. For years, the vape industry has preached advocacy. Get involved, some said, and most ignored it. Now the masses are more educated and involved and putting up a valiant fight. The battle continues, and we'll keep you informed in future shows. The fun also continues over the next few weeks as we have more great topics coming up on future shows. Our mission, our commitment on Vape Radio is to bring you informative and compelling topics and guests. But for now, that wraps up show number 89, and thanks again for listening. Do you have a topic you'd like to hear, or do you have something to share? Someone you'd like us to speak with? Send us a note to norm@vapementors.com. And don't forget, we're offering a free FDA mini course, which you can access at vapementors.com/FDA mini. That's MINI. Before we leave, I also want to offer you all a great opportunity. Would you like to get your product, service, or message in front of our targeted vaping audience? Vape Radio is the #1 vape radio show in the world with more than 1.3 million downloads since 2014, and we were one of the top 10 business podcasts on 2015 on Podbean and beat out more than 130,000 other shows. For just $750, you get your company integrated within 3 different vape radio shows, and we're looking for 2 more advertisers to fill our spot. How about you? Send me a note, norm@vapementors.com. And now we're done. So until next time, vape on.